Many gunfights don't happen at 10 meters. If you're lucky, they happen at 10 centimeters. If someone grabs your gun or grabs you, can you actually stay alive? Today, we're doing a deep dive into the one skill that most shooters never train: real weapon retention and close quarters fighting. I'm speaking to James Smart from Smart Tech down in Cape Town. James, hello and welcome.
Good morning, good afternoon. I'm not sure. It's actually that point in between the two, isn't it? So good day. Thank you very much for having me on.
The advantage of this point in the day is that you accept both.
Absolutely.
Yeah. James, what is it that makes close quarter gunfights so fundamentally different from the range shooting that so many people seem to imagine?
Yeah, well, I so. I think that and it's a age old adage in the shooting world, right? Is that targets don't fight back. So I think where there's there's drills to be done and lessons to be learned under safe environment of the range. But I think the ultimate difference between the range and the real fight, especially at close quarter, is the violence that you're receiving towards you, that puts the pressure of all of your fundamentals and all of your shooting and all of the ninja skills that you've got under under extreme duress, where we're not talking about shooting. Even when it comes to shooting someone at 7 meters, 10 meters, whatever, we're talking about being able to smell this person's breath. And I think that psychological pressure is much more at that kind of range than any other range.
I think it's deceptively easy because you plan on, you've got this idea in your head, something happens, you're going to go for your firearm or a blade or a pepper spray for that matter. It's in X pocket and it's there, and in your head you've got it down to a fine act here. Something happens, you're gonna go for that knife, gun, whatever, and you're gonna get it out and you're gonna be in the fight. And all that really needs to happen is somebody needs to tackle you to the ground, or pin your arms, or even just grab your hand, your shooting hand, and immobilize it. And suddenly all those plans that you had that you never trained for are out the window, and you are fighting without that because you can't reach it. That's a bit of a bummer to find that out in the heat of the moment, right?
Well, and I think the important thing to understand about that close range situation is that you're probably, because the situation has got to that stage, or let's say close to that stage. I think the thing to understand is that you're probably fighting without the initiative. You're fighting without any advantage. In fact, most likely you're fighting from a disadvantage. So even that perfect draw stroke that you've trained on the range, and whether it's, as you said, whether it's a firearm, whether it's a knife, whether it's a pepper spray, whatever it is, that perfect draw stroke that you've trained, that sight acquisition that you've trained, that pushing, all of that is most likely going to be gone because someone's either thrown a right hook or grabbed hold of your firearm, whatever it might be. And as you said, the plan, we trained for these plans, but and what a phrase that we like to use a lot is we plan for success, but we must prepare in case of failure. I mean, I don't necessarily mean failure overall, because obviously our plan is still to succeed and to prevail. But I think that we need to train in case of failure of that plan, and have those kind of what if scenarios of where do I go from here? If I'm I'm some of the way through, or maybe not even through my draw stroke. Maybe you're someone who, dare I say this, I can't even believe that I just laughed slightly as well. So maybe you're someone who doesn't carry one up, right? And now you have to be able to acquire. You just smiled as well. So you, so
Yes.
you've gone for your gun. You've cleared your garment. You're accessing your gun, but you don't even have a round in the chamber. You've still got to rack that gun, and someone's already got hold of you, got hold of it, knocked you to the ground. You've taken a right hook, you're semi-conscious, all of those things that will exponentially take you out of that scenario that you thought you were going to be doing.
Yeah, I must say, I'm not laughing to try, to try and be nasty about it. I've long ago made peace with the fact that some people prefer carrying empty chamber. My attitude has gone from no, you can't do that, to do whatever you must as long as you train for it. But in my mind, I cannot make it make sense for myself.
Well,
I've never been able to.
and I think, for me, I think um, I can contextualize some scenarios where it might be better to carry empty chambered. It's not something that I would do, but I can contextualize in my own mind some situations that where it might be beneficial to do that. But generally, for me, we're digressing. I don't mean to digress, but generally, for me, it would be a case of certain scenarios that might make sense to not carry one up. But I can't rationalize in my head why I would carry all the time like that. And then, of course, there would be the flaw in, well, in this scenario, I'm going to carry one up. In this scenario, I'm not going to carry one up. But then my default response to drawing a firearm is not to rack it, and so on and so on. Then we end up with a failure in that plan of sometimes this and sometimes that, which I'm a firm believer is a terrible idea.
Yeah. Look,
So yeah, don't mean to
it
digress.
is the age-old hot potato.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, our purpose isn't to sort that out today, but the fact of the matter is that it is something that can and most probably will come into play.
Yeah.
So, how realistic is the threat of someone being within arm's reach when you introduce a weapon, firearm, knife, whatever the case might be? And what real world scenarios usually lead to this distance collapsing so mind-blowingly quickly?
Um, so it's a really good question in the how realistic is it? And I don't know the answer to, if we look at percentage of times where a firearm was drawn, how often or could have been drawn, let's say, how often the was the threat within arm's reach? How I don't know the answer to that. I'm sure if someone spent enough time on YouTube, they could probably have some pretty good answers to that. But I think my view is that it's potentially enough times to make it worth being prepared for that event. Um, and I think if we look at guys like, Craig Douglas, and I mentioned him to you the other day, the world leader in that side of the ECQC side of things. And in fact, the truth is that anyone who teaches ECQC has probably watched his videos, whether they credit him or not, has watched his videos and taken something from that to make into their program. And I think the fact that there's so many people doing that now, there is a certain amount of risk stroke realism. Um, who is it most potentially possible for? I would say probably law enforcement type scenarios where, where you have to go, where you've got to go close to that person. Police officers, that kind of thing, doing arrest, that kind of situation. But also, the fact is, most street scenarios, situations are an unequal event where there is an ambush of some description. And the term that we would use is that the criminal always starts with the advantage. And we actually, when we're teaching, we go through a whole list of advantages that the criminal has. And I think in 90% of cases, the criminal wouldn't be attacking you if they didn't have an advantage. And that advantage is normally a close of distance, right? It's either a weapon against you, not a drawn weapon against you not having a weapon, or not having drawn a weapon. And therefore, they've got the intimidation factor and so on. It's a close of distance. It's a number of people that's involved in it. There's many different advantages that a criminal can have. But one of those, especially in a one-on-one situation, would be that they've already closed the distance before you've realized that the attack is even happening. And I think that's probably the most realistic possibility for most people. At the end of the day, most people walk around more or less to some extent with their head up their ass, right? You can say
That's
that,
putting it lightly.
yeah, and even, um, even gun guys or self-defense guys or whatever, we all get caught at some stage where we go, oh, I didn't see that, right? And it's always to say, it's very easy to be that one who says, yeah, but I never have my head at my ass. I'm always in color code whatever. And I've, my policy is never say never and never say always, because there will always be times where you didn't have your head on a swivel and you weren't that ninja guy that was that was wide awake all the time. And you can never say that you'll never get caught unaware, because that's a criminal's job, is to try and make sure that they get you in that situation where you didn't know it was going to happen.
And they are very good at what they do. You have to
Very
give them.
good. Yeah, very good. Absolutely. Well, some are, some aren't, right? Some I like your old school mug there. I was about to take a sip of my coffee and I was like, I shouldn't do that on video, but you've got that really old school tin mug. That's cool.
Yes, it's the best way to drink coffee.
Okay.
Yes, it beats any modern day China sort of mug. Every single time. I've got such a vast array of them. James, to get back to the questions, can you explain to us the concept of weapon retention and why losing control over your gun or off your gun is literally one of the fastest way a gunfight? And I've got in the question here a civilian gunfight, but I mean this goes for any uniform wearer as well, can turn fatal. Why does it turn fatal so quickly if you lose control over that weapon?
So I think the first thing would be, why is it, like, the first part of your question was kind of, why is it such a bad thing, losing a weapon? And I would like to think that's super obvious, but the way that I'm going to describe that is that if you lose your firearm, your weapon, knife, gun, whatever, I think there's two things at play. Number one, you're now not into a weapon retention situation, you're into a weapon disarm situation. In other words, you're now the defender of that weapon, right? Against that weapon being used against you. So I think that's the first thing. Why is weapon retention so important? Because if we lose our weapon, we now become the person who's defending against our own weapon. And I think the other part to play with that is that, and I know some people will disagree with me here, but I think that it's reasonably fair to say that most criminals that are likely or possibly going to be attacking you have much more bad intent than you have of them. I would like to think that you and I and most people out there are relatively well-balanced human beings. And the fact is, if we're a legal gun carrier, then we should have proved that we're relatively well-balanced. And by being well-balanced, it means that we probably don't have that same intent. And I know people, will say, yeah, but I'll kill someone if they try and kill me, whatever. Yeah, that's fine until you're looking through the front sight or you're fighting for your life. And then it can become a very different story altogether. So I think that we should always take into account the fact that the criminal that is trying to take your weapon from you is more likely to use that weapon against you than you are to use that weapon against them. And the truth is, I think that there's a reasonable portion of people that carry a firearm that have never drawn their firearm in anger. And the first time they ever do might very well experience some sort of psychological hindrance about actually using it. And I think that we probably don't know that that's a possibility until the day that we find out, which is, because how else do we find that out apart from doing it? So whereas a lot of criminals, I know a young lad he's literally just come out of Polesmore. He was there for 4 weeks or something of that sort, waiting for bail. But some of the stuff that he's told me about being in Polesmore, you've got to know that those people that are in the criminal element have far more intent than you do, far more.
And they've, using violence on you, odds are it's not the first time they've applied violence.
Yeah, exactly.
Odds are they've had a long history of it, and you are just the next target. So they're very well used to it and very well versed in it. For most of us normally adapted people, if something violent suddenly happens, it tends to completely throw you. The range of reactions to it is vast. And I think the danger for me also is if you walk around, you arm yourself, you decide, I'm going to be armed, whether it's a gun, knife, but I'm going to carry something on me. to try and prevent a scenario where I have to actually fight with my hands, if at all possible. Although you should never
Well,
discard that, because it's always possible, is it not? Anyway, but you've got this uh, picture in your mind of how you're going to go for your gun or your knife, and you're going to introduce it, and you're going to sort the problem out. And I think if something happens and you lose that gun, with maybe you just bump your hand against the table as you come up and you lose your grip. Maybe the guy hits you, whatever, anything can happen. Maybe you
maybe you
completely
fumble your
run.
drawstroke, right? Maybe you actually, under that
Exactly.
moment of high adrenaline and realizing that there's a threat to your life, maybe you even don't get a good enough grip and you fumble your drawstroke. I've seen that happen in training a million times.
Exactly. Or you, as the gun come up, you press the mag release, and you know, in
There
your
you go. Right?
subconscious mind, you just realize that something fell out of my gun right now. I think the psychological impact of that can be so devastating that in probably most cases, it has the potential of completely turning your fight on its head, and basically giving it to whoever the attacker is.
Yeah.
And the only real way of countering that is by introducing ongoing training that puts you under the kind of induced stress in controlled circumstances, where you
Yes.
can start teaching your mind to operate better with that sort of stress levels. And even
But
then, it's not always a given.
and I agree, 100% agree with that. I think if you're training without some degree of stress, and it's funny because if you're training without some degree of stress to test your fundamentals, um, and if you're training, you haven't trained your fundamentals properly, and you're training all the ninja stuff in the world, and you're neglecting your fundamentals, then that's going to break really quickly. Because what do we rely on when that duress, when that high stress situation, and our brain has just gone dead, right? Because something's gone wrong, our mag dropped out, whatever. We got a double feed or something of that sort, right? So if you're not training under stress and you're not looking after your fundamentals, I think you're setting yourself up for disaster. But the other thing that comes along with that is that I think there's two things in that. Number one, sometimes people's we call it a stress inoculation, right? So we're going to stress inoculate you, and in the old days, or not so actually, so in the old days, I think stress inoculation was really good, and then I think there's been a period of time where the stress inoculation is right. Do 10 burpees, do 10 push-ups. Now your adrenaline is higher. No, it's not. Your heart rate is higher, and you're maybe suffering a bit of exhaustion, but your adrenaline isn't necessarily that much higher. All we've done is replicated a high heart rate, right? So we actually a few years ago, and I'm actually not going to go into too much detail about how we did this, but I realized that we were not stress inoculating people properly. So we started stress inoculating people properly, and it was we were very careful about it, and we were very it was very important to introduce people to it over a period of time and through a progressive system. But we really started stress inoculating people properly, and we've even seen things like people not realizing, and obviously just caveat, we never did this live fire ever. It was always with airsoft or paint marker guns, that kind of thing. But the amount of times that something would happen, and you just mentioned, accidentally in a struggle for the firearm, the mag release gets hit, and most mag releases are in exactly the same place. So when someone grips your firearm, and you've got a grip on it as well, what very, very often happens is that mag release gets hit, and then the magazine, best case scenario, becomes unseated. Worst case scenario comes out altogether. And the numbers of times that I've seen someone manage to break free, then bring their firearm up as if they're going to then use that firearm because they've broken away and they've made a little bit of space, and they had no idea that there was no mag in there was no magazine in it. They had literally no idea at all. And then all of a sudden, what you do is you see them. So they push the firearm out, and there's a click, and then they stand there and they look at the mag well with this moment of, what is going on right now? And then trust me, just give me that opportunity and I'm going to right hook you. Because there can't be that freeze moment. And it's funny, we talk about when we're talking about stress, we talk about fight or flight. And the fact is, we're men, and therefore there's, we're either going to fight or we're going to flight, and we're never run. So we're always going to be in there. We're that guy that's always going. Well, the other thing that happens is freeze. And if I'd rather be running than freezing. So practice your fight and your flight, and practice and have good skill sets to be able to break free of that encounter. But if running is the right thing to do, let's not call it running. Let's call it tactical withdrawal, because it makes us feel a little better as men rather than running. So better to do that tactical withdrawal than to stand there frozen in time, wondering what to do next. So train that stuff and put yourself under distress. But the reason why people don't do that is because it's just straight up and down unpleasant. And so they might do it one time. I used to bring Craig Douglas over to South Africa, and he came over, I think, 2 or 3 times, I think. Amazing courses, amazing. But one of the first to really put people under that stress and do what he calls honest training. And I had one course where there was, and I've had other courses as well that I've been running, where people have just turned and said, I don't want to do this, it's too hard. I'm like, okay, well, don't do it then. Cheers.
I just want to, before I move on to the next question, I just want to go back to what I said when I said that regarding training, and then it doesn't even always help, because somebody's going to comment on that. What I mean by that very specifically is that the more you train, the better you train, the more intense you start training, the more you are starting to level up the odds in your favor. The less you do it, the less the odds. That's, at the end of the day, that's all you can do, because it's not a guarantee that you can that you're going to win a fight. Anything can happen, but you are juggling odds in your favor, and I think your life is worth juggling those odds. What are the biggest mistakes people make when drawing a firearm in tight spaces, or maybe during an ambush?
Extending the firearm away from your body. Done. It's the biggest mistake. It's the most common mistake. It's something that we all go to the range and train. Every time we go to the range, what do? We draw the firearm up to, wherever, mid-chest level, whatever, and we extend that firearm away from us fully, and then we start taking our shots, because we've said to ourselves, draw the firearm, extend the firearm so that we've got a sight picture, sight alignment, wada, and take my however many shots that I'm going to take. So we completely ingrain a motor function, and I don't like using the word muscle memory because muscles don't have memory, but so we completely ingrain a motor function that would replicate under stress, because we do it so much, of fully extending our arms before we take a shot, number one, and always fully extending our arms. And we see it all the time. And essentially, what needs to be trained is that, number one, I don't always have to fully extend my firearm to be able to start taking well-placed shots. And number two, maybe it would be appropriate for me to not fully extend my firearm and to protect my firearm before I even put my finger on the trigger. Maybe I should actually be drawing the firearm and having my drawstroke interrupted, so that I realize that firearm should then stay close to my body. If the firearm is between our hips and our shoulders and close to our body, we have the ability, even with relatively low skill, we have the ability to protect that weapon. Actually, it doesn't just have to be a firearm. It could be a knife, whatever. So if it's close to our body and it's between our hips and our shoulders, we have an ability to be able to control and protect that weapon. The minute that we start pushing that weapon away from us or outside of our hips and shoulders, we lose control of that weapon. And that's just biomechanics and body and all that kind of thing. So if you add good core strength to that fight and it's close to your body, you stand a pretty good chance of managing to maintain control of that firearm. But if you start extending it away from you, you're now using smaller, weaker muscles to be able to control that. And the person who's now bearing down on it and wrapping their whole body around it is now in a much better position to be able to take control of that firearm. So I think the definitely number one most common mistake and most common problem is training to always fully extend the firearm before we take any shots, and fully extend the firearm every time.
And the natural counter for that, obviously, training.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. The problem is that we will always default to, not necessarily, what do they say, default to, what's the saying? We'll default to um, our lowest level of training, I think it is, or our last
I think
training.
that, yeah, I think
But
that's what.
what we default to is what we've done most. And the problem is that most of us, and me included, have spent most of our range time defaulting to push fully extend in the firearm and only taken shots when we've decided to. And that, that was I don't now, because actually I probably spend 50-50. Well, maybe because of me and what I do, I spend
Yeah,
less time fully extending the firearm than I do actually starting my shots from here, or actually deciding not to, and then bringing it back to here and realizing that I might need to fend, I might need to do something else to be able to interrupt someone's pattern of trying to get my firearm from me. So I think with every draw stroke that we do, or we should, just make sure that you bring it into your training, that sometimes you're not going to fully extend and you're going to bring it back to you, and sometimes you're going to need to start shooting before you fully extend. I think it's just really important to incorporate those into your training.
clinch fighting. How can that change the entire dynamic of using a gun? And why do you think firearms training need to include elements of such, let's just call it physical entanglement?
Well, for exactly the reasons that we're talking about. If someone grabs hold of your firearm, establishing a dominant position, a dominant body position, and to be able to keep control of your weapon and get someone away from your weapon, it is basically is based around posture and dynamic body dynamics and use of larger muscle groups and so on. So understanding how to clinch, how to achieve a stronger body position and a dominant position within that vertical entanglement or horizontal entanglement. In other words, you fall into the ground. How do I establish a position that can control or retain my firearm at the same time as being able to get back to my feet? As a jiu-jitsu guy, one of the things that I had to learn very early on, because super comfortable on the ground, happy place, it's all good, fight goes to the ground, no problem at all. What I didn't realize in the very early days was that being on the ground with a weapon, whether it's a firearm or a knife, is just a terrible, terrible thing. So I hadn't spent enough time. What I had to do is learn to be uncomfortable on the ground if I had a weapon, and my focus needed to be getting back to my feet to be able to create space to draw the weapon or use the weapon under less stress. So being able to understand horizontal and vertical ability to be able to achieve a dominant position and create space is imperative, and clinch work is how you do that. You can go to a wrestling club, Greco-Roman wrestling. You can go to, I think Greco-Roman probably has, but some jiu-jitsu clubs, MMA clubs will all be able to teach. And actually, the fence work in MMA is really good for understanding that. But as a gun guy, you've just got to contextualize it, that it's not a sports situation or an MMA situation. We're carrying weapons here. So learn the fundamentals and then go back to your buddies and get a dummy gun and a dummy knife and see how it works out. And train that in that context. So bringing it back to the right context, I think. But you've got to have some sort of understanding. The thing is, someone can throw a knockout punch by accident, right? Anyone can do that. It can just be a wild punch, but you can't establish a dominant position by accident. People don't do that by accident. It's a learned skill. So just taking a little bit of time, even just going onto YouTube and watching some Greco-Roman wrestling or some jiu-jitsu or some MMA fence work, and then getting together with your buddies and just learning and feeling and understanding. And the other thing I think is about not just about understanding and learning the skill sets, but understanding and learning what it feels like when someone is that close to you, grabbing hold of you. The number of times we have someone come into our academy, and and the most interesting thing is when I lay them down on their back. Right, this isn't necessarily weapons work, but I'll lay them down on their back, and then I'll sit on top of them, and I'll say to them, right, how do you get out from here? And number one, people generally don't know how to get out. But number two, interestingly, the amount of people that just freak out by having someone that close to them and that be feeling that claustrophobic. Okay, now the first time you've got someone here and you can smell their breath and they're reaching for your firearm and you thought you were going to, because you'd only ever trained drawing and being able to push it out and take your shots. Now all of a sudden their breath and their strength and you go to do something, but now you're weak. If the first time you ever experienced that is in a live situation, you're done.
It's a bad feeling. It sucks,
Yeah.
to say the least. Definitely. And if you haven't been introduced to that previously, that's a bad time to find out. Big time.
It's the worst time to go.
For the final question of part one of the series, in an entangled fight, when should a defender prioritize retaining the weapon versus creating space to draw and shoot?
So, just to repeat that again, when should someone prioritize retaining the weapon versus creating space to shoot?
To draw and shoot, yes.
My answer would be you should always prioritize creating space to take whatever action is suitable next. I'm not going to necessarily say drawing and shooting, but creating space should always be prioritized. The longer that you're in that entanglement, the more likely you are to lose it, right? Because there's so much that you said earlier that there's no guarantees around fighting. There's no guarantees that anyone's going to win or lose or whatever. So the longer that you're in that entanglement, the more that luck is on their side and the more that your energy is draining and the more possibilities are being created by by movement and frustration and panic and all those kind of things. So I think the priority should always be create space, maintaining your base and ability to move, and then taking whatever action next. Now, so even if I'm in an entanglement, my priority would be to retain my weapon. Obviously, don't let the guy's hands near my weapon or get the guy's hands off my weapon. But why am I doing that? I'm doing it so that I can create space, if that makes sense.
Okay. And that is the end of part one of this two-part series. So just to end this, if you carry a gun, but you never train for the moment someone's close enough to touch you, you are probably preparing for the wrong fight. Share this episode with someone who carries. You might just save their life.